In the heart of the city, the courthouse stood as a monument to justice, its marble columns and grand facade exuding an air of solemnity. Inside, the courtroom was a hive of subdued conversations as attendees found their places on the polished wooden benches. The elevated bench of Judge Eleanor Whitmore commanded attention, a testament to her authority and, for many, a source of unease. At the defendant's table stood Jonathan Hayes, a distinguished African-American man in his mid-40s. His impeccably tailored suit complemented his composed demeanor. With an upright posture and a steady gaze, he exuded confidence. This self-assurance starkly contrasted with the evident disdain etched on Judge Whitmore's face. She tapped her gavel once, the sharp sound silencing the lingering whispers. "Let's proceed," she muttered, barely concealing her irritation. "I have no time for trivialities." Jonathan arched an eyebrow, but chose to remain silent, awaiting the judge's direction. He was familiar with this scenario, the dismissive looks, the patronizing tones. It was a narrative he knew all too well. Leaning forward, Judge Whitmore's eyes narrowed. "Individuals like you always believe the rules are beneath them, always seeking shortcuts," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. A few gasps resonated throughout the room. The court stenographer hesitated momentarily before resuming her transcription. Jonathan maintained his composure, though the insult was unmistakable. "Excuse me, Your Honor," he responded, his tone measured and calm. "You heard me," she snapped. "Your kind always tries to game the system, thinking you can just waltz in here and expect special privileges." A heavy silence enveloped the courtroom. Even a bailiff shifted uncomfortably. Jonathan took a slow, deliberate breath. He had encountered prejudice before, but rarely this overtly in a courtroom. Reaching into his pocket, he retrieved a small badge, holding it up for all to see. "I anticipated fair treatment today," he began, his voice resonant and authoritative. "But it appears I must remind you of my true identity." Judge Whitmore scoffed, a smirk playing on her lips as she leaned back in her chair. "And what exactly do you mean by that?" she inquired, her voice laced with sarcasm, barely glancing at the badge as if dismissing it as a mere prop. Jonathan remained unruffled, placing the badge on the defendant's table where it gleamed under the courtroom lights. "I am Special Agent Jonathan Hayes with the Federal Bureau of Investigation," he stated clearly, his words slicing through the tension like a knife. The courtroom fell into a stunned silence. The prosecutor, who had been nonchalantly flipping through documents, froze. The bailiff straightened his stance. Spectators leaned forward, eyes widening in astonishment. Judge Whitmore rolled her eyes, letting out a dry chuckle. "Nice try," she sneered. "Do you really expect me to believe that? Flashing a counterfeit badge won't extricate you from this situation." Jonathan didn't flinch. From his other pocket, he calmly produced an official ID, stepping forward to place it on the bench before the judge. "You're welcome to verify it, Your Honor," he said, his tone unwavering. The judge hesitated, her smirk faltering for a brief moment before she regained her composure. "Even if that's legitimate," she countered, attempting to reassert control, "it doesn't change the fact that you're here as a defendant." Jonathan tilted his head slightly. "That's where you're mistaken, Judge," he replied. "I'm here on official business, and after your recent comments, that business now involves you." A ripple of shock coursed through the courtroom. Murmurs intensified, growing louder. Judge Whitmore shifted in her seat, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. "I don't know what game you're playing," she snapped, "but this is my courtroom. You have no authority here." Jonathan offered a knowing smile. "That's where you're wrong, Judge," he said, "and you're about to discover just how mistaken you are." The judge narrowed her eyes, a flicker of doubt betraying her otherwise stern facade. She glanced at the ID again, as if willing it to be fake, but the official FBI emblem was unmistakable. The tension was palpable. The prosecutor adjusted his tie, stealing glances at the bailiff, who now appeared uncertain. The audience whispered among themselves, eyes darting between Jonathan and the judge. You expect me to take your word for it? Whitmore scoffed, gripping the edge of her bench. This is my courtroom. I decide what transpires here. Jonathan remained calm. Turning slightly, he addressed the bailiff. I suggest you verify my credentials. Contact the bureau. You'll find my authority supersedes hers. His words were firm, yet measured. The bailiff hesitated, awaiting the judge's reaction. Whitmore waved a dismissive hand. This is absurd, she muttered. We're done here. She reached for her gavel, preparing to move to the next case. But Jonathan wasn't finished. Actually, Judge, he interjected, stepping forward, you're the one who's done. The words landed heavily. Whitmore froze, her fingers tightening around the gavel. Excuse me, she hissed, her face reddening. Jonathan produced a folded document from his jacket pocket. This is a federal warrant, he announced, unfolding it deliberately for all to see. For your arrest. The courtroom erupted in gasps. The prosecutor nearly dropped his pen. The bailiff took an involuntary step forward, eyes darting between Jonathan and the judge. Whitmore let out a dry laugh, shaking her head in disbelief. This is a joke, she muttered. It has to be. Jonathan remained silent, allowing the weight of his words to settle. The bailiff, recognizing the gravity of the situation, cautiously took the document from Jonathan's hand, scanning its contents. The judge's smug expression began to fade as she observed the bailiff's changing demeanor. A cold sweat formed on her brow. The authority she had wielded effortlessly for years was slipping away. She was no longer the judge in control. Now, she was the one on trial. Her hands clenched around the gavel, face contorted with disbelief. The courtroom was no longer hers to command. The bailiff, after carefully reviewing the warrant, looked up at her, his expression a blend of hesitation and duty. The silence was suffocating. Everyone awaited the next move. This is ridiculous, Whitmore stammered, her voice lacking its usual authority. You think you could just walk in here and pull a stunt like this? I'm a judge. I decide who gets arrested in my courtroom. Jonathan didn't waver. Crossing his arms, he nodded toward the bailiff. She's stalling. You've read the warrant. You know what needs to be done. The bailiff hesitated briefly before stepping forward. Your Honor, he said carefully, I need you to stand up. Whitmore let out a sharp, humorless laugh. You can't be serious, she snapped. Do you know who I am? Do you have any idea the power I hold? Jonathan raised an eyebrow. Not anymore. The tension shattered like a thunderclap. The courtroom buzzed with whispers and gasps as the weight of those words sank in. Judge Whitmore's face drained of color. She scanned the room, searching desperately for a lifeline. The prosecutor looked away, clearly wanting no part of what was unfolding. The court clerk kept her eyes on the keyboard, her fingers robotically typing as if pretending not to see. The officer stationed in the back didn't move a muscle. No one stepped forward to defend her. No one dared. The bailiff took another cautious step closer. Judge Whitmore, he said again, more firmly this time, please stand up. Her hands were trembling now, though she tried to hide it by gripping the edge of the bench. Her lips parted, but no words came out. For the first time in her career, the judge who had commanded silence with a single glare was at a loss. This isn't happening, she whispered. But it was. Then, like a switch had flipped, she suddenly stood up, her spine stiffening as she summoned what was left of her pride. She glared at Jonathan with venom in her eyes. You think you've won something? She spat. This is just a misunderstanding. I'll be back on this bench by next week. And when I am... You won't, Jonathan said quietly but firmly, cutting her off. Your corruption ends today. The bailiff, now without hesitation, stepped forward and reached for the handcuffs. The sound of the metal clicking shut around her wrists echoed throughout the courtroom like a shot. Whitmore flinched, her expression twisted between disbelief and rage, but she couldn't hide the fear anymore. Not behind her gavel, not behind her robe, not behind years of perceived untouchability. The spectators watched in stunned silence. Some whispered, some recorded on their phones. A few, especially those who had once stood where Jonathan stood now, simply nodded in quiet satisfaction. "This is a disgrace," Whitmore shouted as the bailiff gently led her from behind the bench. "You have no right to do this. I am the law in this courtroom." Jonathan took a slow step forward. "You were," he replied. "But justice doesn't bow to ego or prejudice." As she was escorted down the steps of the bench she once ruled from, Whitmore looked like a woman waking from a dream, a nightmare of her own making. The courtroom that had once been hers was now just a room full of people watching her fall. The prosecutor finally stood, cleared his throat, and addressed the substitute judge, who had quietly taken her seat during the commotion. "Given the circumstances," he said, adjusting his tie with visible unease, "I move to have the charges against Special Agent Hayes dropped, effective immediately." The substitute judge, a soft-spoken woman named Judge Morales, gave a single nod and brought the gavel down with deliberate force. Case dismissed. Applause erupted. Not the wild kind you'd hear at a concert or political rally. This was something quieter but deeper. The sound of a crowd witnessing justice in real time. The sound of people realizing the system, flawed as it often was, could still correct itself. Jonathan turned and walked down the aisle, past the benches of stunned spectators, past the journalists who had suddenly found the story of the week, and out into the crisp air beyond the courthouse steps. Reporters immediately swarmed him, microphones and cameras in his face, questions flying from every direction. "Agent Hayes, did you know the judge was corrupt before today? Was this part of a wider investigation? Is this the beginning of a federal crackdown on judicial misconduct?" Jonathan paused only once, looked into the sea of flashing lights and pointed microphones, and said, "The law belongs to the people. No one, no matter their robe, badge, or title, is above it." Then he walked away. He didn't need to stay and bask in the spotlight. That wasn't why he had come. Justice had been served, and that was enough. Behind him, in a holding room inside the courthouse, Eleanor Whitmore sat alone in a steel chair, her robe stripped, her gavel gone, her name soon to be etched into records of disgrace. For the first time, she was just another citizen facing the consequences of her actions. And for the first time, she realized what it meant to be held accountable.